Hi everyone, my name is Courtney and welcome back to my channel. And like the title says, today I'm going to be talking about my favorite 2020 reads, but I decided to do a little bit of a different video. Today I'm going to be doing my 2020 highlights, which basically instead of doing a point and shoot video, I'm just doing something a little bit different, a little bit more loose, so that I can discuss a whole wide range of books. I just ended up reading so many good books this year, so many impactful reads as well, and I just wanted to be able to discuss a whole array of books. And so we're going to be doing it in this kind of highlight fashion, so we can go over a lot of books really quickly. So as you can see, I'm kind of organizing the books, and that's because I'm going to be talking about books in different categories. Basically, a lot of books fall into similar categories, so I'm just talking about them through that. First, we're going to be discussing my favorite reads of my school reading. So I am a graduate student, and I read a lot of short story collections this year. My favorite short story collection that I read was Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado. It's a speculative fiction, queer short story collection, and I loved it. It was so great. Unfortunately, all the other short story collections that I read this year are back at school, but some of my highlights include Orange World by Karen Russell, What It Means When a Man Falls from the Sky by Leslie Arima, Daniel Evans, Before You Suffocate Your Own Fool Self. And then in my school reading, I also want to include Bunny. Wasn't my favorite book of this year, but it was so impactful, and it wasn't technically school reading, but it was something I read for my own educational purposes, and yeah, it was a lot, but I loved it. Next category we're getting into is my miscellaneous category. These books just didn't fit in the other categories I had. We're starting off with Dig by A.S. King. I just finished this. It's a YA contemporary about white privilege. Next we have Circe by Madeline Miller. This is an adult historical fiction fantasy story, and it's kind of an episodic journey through one goddess's experience, the goddess Circe, who is a minor goddess. Definitely recommend. And then next we have Hood Feminism, which is a nonfiction collection of short essays all about intersectional feminism. This nonfiction really taught me how much I do love nonfiction, and I'm really excited to read more nonfiction in 2021 because of this book. The next category we're going to be getting into is series. So these are some of my favorite series that I either continued or finished. First, we're starting off with The Dragon Tea Society by Kay O'Neill. I just love Kay's work so much. I love their art. It's beautiful, it's stunning, and their stories are so charming. I read the first two books in this series and I absolutely loved it. And then the next series I have is Yona of the Dawn. This is one of my favorite series to read every single year. I've been reading it for like 6 years now. It's a YA shoujo fantasy series. It has such great character development, and it's always just a highlight of the year for me. The next series I have is Check Please. This is a sports hockey webcomic. Love it. Next, I have the Full Metal Alchemist series. I started and finished this series. I have such fond memories of watching the anime in middle school and then rewatching it in college, and so it was so fun to pick up the manga and read the original work this year. Such a great quarantine read. Next, I have Come Tumbling Down by Shauna McGuire. This is part of the Wayward Children series. It's a fantasy series talking about children that come back from other portal worlds, and I love it so much. Next, we have Auha Ride. This is a YA contemporary romance story. It's one of my favorite series of all time, and I was so happy to collect and finish collecting it this year, and it was just a highlight for me because I do love that series. And then we have the Girl of Fire and Thorn series by Ray Carson. I started and finished this series this year. This is a YA fantasy, but it is more character driven, more character focused, and I just really love that storytelling style in fantasy. Highly recommend that. Not a perfect book, but I really enjoyed it. And then the next book I have is A Beautiful Foolish Endeavor by Hank Green, the concluding novel in like the Carls series. This book really got me interested in adult sci-fi, and I just loved how humanitarian focused it was, and I just love what this book said. It's a little bit different than the first one, but I still really enjoyed both books in the series. Next, I have Braybear by Jordan E. Fuego. This is a YA fantasy novel with an African-inspired setting, and I just want more people to read this because it was so different, so unique, so interesting, and I really liked this one. And so yes, these were some of my favorite series of the year, and the next category we're going to be getting into is my queer reads. So first off, we have Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. I read a lot of Alice Oseman this year, but this one was my favorite. Just a coming-of-age wandering friendship story. Next, I have Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. This is a paranormal fantasy with a trans character who's in a male-male relationship. Loved it. So fun. Next, I have Felix Ever After by Casing Calendar. This is a YA contemporary about a young trans boy living in New York, having a messy time. I loved it. My dog did too. Next, I have Juliet Takes a Breath by Gabby Rivera. This is a YA contemporary about a young lesbian who goes on a trip basically to live with her idol feminist theory person. And then next, I have A Midnight Lie. This was a female-female romance fantasy novel. Loved it so much. It's just so angsty and I loved it desperately. Next, we have The Weight of the Stars, which is another female-female romance. This is a sci-fi speculative story about space travel, and I loved it. I want to reread it because it was just so much fun, so weird and different. Next, we have Real Queer America by Samantha Allen. This is another nonfiction book about Samantha's travels through red states. I don't read a lot of nonfiction, but I loved it. Next, we have The Miseducation of Cameron Post. This is kind of a staple in YA queer fiction, and so I was so happy to read it this year, and I really, really loved it. It was basically just about this one girl's journey, and I really loved it. Next, we have On a Sunbeam by Tilly Walden. This is a sci-fi female-female story, and I loved the art. I loved just everything about this. It was just so heartwarming. And then next we have The Last True Poets of the Sea by Julia Drake. This is about an angry bi girl living in a small coastal town. Next we have Pet by Akwaeke Imezi. This is a sort of speculative story set in the near-ish future. Everything seems perfect, but it's not. So yes, these were some of my queer reads. Basically, I just read a lot of queer books and I really enjoyed them, and my favorite book of the year ended up being a queer book as well, which is, of course, This Is How You Lose the Time War by Alma El Mohtar and Max Gladstone. This was poetic, it was desperately sapphic, and it was a sci-fi about two enemies caught in between a time war, and I just desperately loved it. Definitely the best book I read this year by far. So yes, these were my 2020 reading highlights. Thank you so much for sticking with me and watching this video. Let me know what your favorite 2020 highlights were in the comments down below. I'd love to know. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys later, and happy reading.